Essay papers and research papers might seem really scary, but in fact, you probably already know how to write one if you've ever watched a film or a television program that's centered on a court case. This is nothing more than a proof, just like a court case. So who are the key players? Well, you, of course. You are the lawyer. You are arguing this case. Sometimes students get confused about the role of the person reading the paper. You may think that you are writing for your teacher or your professor, but in fact, you should be writing as if you were presenting the information for publication. Your readers are very much like a jury. They do not know what you did in class, and they certainly do not know as much as your professor does. An opening argument is really the same thing as the introduction to your paper. You need to outline the circumstances. If you're writing about a literary work, you would talk about who the author is, when the story is set, and some of the key players whom you will be discussing in the paper. You're also going to tell the judge and the jury what exactly you're going to prove. But be careful. Don't lay out your whole argument in your opening statement, or the jury will get bored. The introduction should have an inverted structure. Start with the most broad information about the topic, and then get more and more specific until you get down to your thesis statement. Your thesis statement, quite simply, is what you're going to prove. It is a position that you take. It's, in short, your point. The body of the paper is your argument, just like you would make in a court case. It begins with your evidence. Evidence could come from studies, from published papers, or from a literary work that you're examining. Be careful to present just one piece at a time. Don't confuse your jury by mixing things up together. Walk through it simply one piece at a time. Make sure that you give enough detail that someone who has not read the book or the study that you're writing about could understand it. And make sure that you relate each piece of evidence back to your thesis. This is a good way to make sure that you do not wander off topic. A good hint is to proofread your paper by reading just the first sentence of each paragraph and saying to yourself, well, does this prove my thesis? Does this relate to my thesis? If it doesn't, you've wandered off topic. Sometimes you may find evidence that seems to disprove your theory. You can't just sweep it under the rug because somebody out there already knows this. A good way to introduce this information is to start with a phrase like, on the other hand. Don't shortchange it. Don't make it less detailed than the rest of your paper. Be fair about what the counter evidence is, and then try your best to knock down that counter argument. Your conclusion is really your closing argument. Here, you need to summarize what has already been laid out, because the jury may have forgotten by the time they get to the end of the case that first piece of evidence that you mentioned up front, but you should not be introducing any new information. This is just a summary, so don't double the size of your paper by restating everything in great detail. This should be an executive summary that can literally be pulled away from your paper and serve as a short synopsis of what your argument is all about. End your closing statement, which is the end of your paper, by showing your audience that you have proved your case. You do this by restating your thesis. There are some things that might make Her Honor get a little bit irritated with you. She might discount your opinion. This is a formal argument. Your opinion is good for a reflection paper or a journal, but an essay or research paper is a formal academic proof. Your opinion doesn't matter. Just give us the facts. If you make sweeping statements that have no proof, they are not admissible as evidence. You might think, for example, that most people own a car, but can you prove it? Similarly, there is a temptation to make comments about the people around us. For example, everybody wants the latest technology, but can you prove that? Also be careful of information from unreliable sources. You may be tempted to use Wikipedia or someone's blog, but those are not formal academic sources. Look for articles that are published in reputable journals. Your jury also might get confused, especially if you give information that you haven't explained. Historical events such as the American Revolution might be well known, but there are historical events that are not common knowledge. One example of this is the Armenian genocide. Technical terms might be familiar to you if you're a specialist, but your audience might need some explanation. If you write about someone famous like George Washington, he needs no introduction. But if you're talking about people who are less famous, you may need to provide some background about them. A good rule of thumb is that if you did not know about this person or about this study or about this technical term before you started writing your paper, chances are your audience won't know either.